On a sweltering August afternoon, Jack Reynolds gripped the wheel of his old Ford pickup, the kind of truck that had seen more than a few hard miles. At 54, Jack's body carried the proof of 20 years in the Army and another decade, building his own construction business from the ground up. His hair was peppered with gray, his hands were calloused, and his green eyes were as sharp as they'd been on his tours overseas. But this wasn't a mission overseas, this was personal. For 3 long weeks, his daughter Emily Reynolds Carson had been strangely quiet. Her text replies were polite but distant, so unlike the spirited young woman who used to laugh at his corny jokes and debate him over the dinner table. Emily's husband, Ryan Carson, was away on a long-term engineering contract, leaving her alone in the grand home of his wealthy parents, Margaret Carson and Charles Carson, in the upscale suburb of Maple Ridge. Jack had only visited twice since the wedding, and both times, the Carsons had made it clear he didn't belong. Today, Jack was done waiting. The California heat rolled off the pavement in shimmering waves as he turned into the Carsons' tree-lined street. The manicured lawns and polished luxury cars were a world away from his modest home. At the end of the drive stood the Carson estate, all brick and stone, exuding old money confidence. Margaret greeted him at the door with a tight smile, her voice clipped and polished. "She's out back," she said, as if sending him to fetch a misbehaving child. Jack had no idea that within minutes, he'd find his daughter living in conditions no decent parent could accept, and that what he discovered in the backyard would ignite a battle neither family would ever forget. Jack followed Margaret's directions through the gleaming kitchen. Every surface polished like it belonged in a home magazine. The air conditioning inside was almost icy compared to the suffocating heat outside. French doors opened to a shaded patio, complete with ceiling fans, cushioned furniture, and a crystal-clear pool glinting in the afternoon sun. But Jack's attention was pulled past the luxurious straight to the far corner of the yard. There, under the merciless California sun, sat a small wooden shed. No shade trees, no awning, no mercy from the 100-plus-degree heat. Jack crossed the manicured lawn, his boots crunching on grass already brittle from drought. The closer he came, the worse it felt. The shed's single small window faced away from the house, toward a tall wooden fence that blocked it from any neighbor's view. He knocked on the door. "Dad." Emily's voice was a mix of shock and relief. When she opened the door, Jack's stomach dropped. His daughter's hair was damp with sweat, her face flushed deep red. She wore wrinkled shorts and a tank top, the kind of wrinkles that came from sleeping in them. Inside, a narrow cot, an overstuffed plastic bin of clothes, and a cheap box fan moving hot air in circles. A thermometer on the wall read 104 degrees Fahrenheit. "What the hell is this?" Jack demanded. Emily looked toward the main house, her voice trembling. Margaret says I can't be in the main house when Ryan's away. Only blood family is allowed inside. I've been here since he left 3 months. Jack could feel the controlled fury rising in him, the same cold focus he'd had in dangerous situations overseas. "This isn't temporary, Emily. This is abuse." She tried to explain, saying Margaret had influence in the community, that causing trouble might hurt Ryan's business when he came home. Jack studied her face, dark circles under her eyes, lips dry, despite the water bottle she rationed like a soldier in the desert. The confident young woman he'd raised had been worn down into someone afraid to take up space. "Pack your things," Jack said firmly. "Dad, I can't just leave. You can, and you will. Now." They walked back across the yard together, Emily carrying a small duffel. Jack left the bin of clothes in the shed intentionally. He wanted the Carsons to see exactly what they'd reduced his daughter to. Inside, the icy air felt wrong now. He found Charles Carson in the kitchen with a glass of bourbon in hand, Margaret standing beside him like a queen in her court. Pleasantries didn't last long. "We've provided accommodation appropriate to her status," Margaret said, her chin lifting with pride. "The shed is perfectly adequate for temporary housing." 3 months in a 100-degree oven? Jack's voice was low but dangerous. "Our house, our rules," Charles said, the charm gone. "No." Jack stepped closer, his voice rising for the first time. You locked my daughter out of her own home. You treated her like hired help. And now you're going to find out what that costs." Margaret's eyes narrowed. "Is that a threat?" Jack leaned in just enough for her to see the steel in his gaze. "No, ma'am. That's a promise." With Emily at his side, he walked out of the Carson estate without another word. But in his mind, the battle had already begun. These people thought their money and connections made them untouchable. Jack had spent a lifetime facing enemies who underestimated him. This time, the war would be personal and he knew exactly how to fight it. Jack didn't waste any time once he got Emily home. His modest ranch-style house in Fairview wasn't fancy. It was clean, cool, and most importantly hers as much as his. He cranked the AC to 68 degrees Fahrenheit and poured her a tall glass of sweet tea with extra ice while she showered. He could hear the water running for a good 20 minutes and didn't begrudge her a single second of it. When she came out, a different woman, hair washed and dried, skin no longer flushed from heat exhaustion, dressed in jeans and a t-shirt instead of rumpled clothes from the shed. But Jack could still see the weight in her eyes. "Sit down," he told her, sliding the glass across the table. "Tell me everything. Start from the beginning." Emily hesitated, fingers curling around the glass. "It started before the wedding. Little comments. Margaret would mention Ryan's ex-girlfriend's good family or suggest I take cooking classes so I could fit into their social circle. Nothing big enough to make a scene over, but it wore me down." Jack listened without interrupting, though his jaw tightened. "When Ryan's business started struggling, his parents offered to let us live with them temporarily so we could save money. But they made me pay $1,800 a month for utilities and food, most of my paycheck." She gave a bitter laugh, and Ryan left for a 6-month contract overseas, and the day after, Margaret sat me down and laid out new rules. No guests without permission. Kitchen access only in the mornings, no pool or patio unless invited, and no main house after 10 p.m. for security, she said. Jack's hands clenched on the table, and the shed. She called it guest accommodations for non-blood family when the head of household is gone. Said it would teach me to appreciate the finer things in life. Emily's voice cracked. I thought I could tough it out. 2 more months, and Ryan would be home. But she intercepted my calls, filtered my emails, made sure I couldn't tell him what was really going on without sounding like I was attacking his family. Jack reached across the table, gripping her hand. Emily, what they did isn't just wrong, it's abuse, financial control, forced isolation, unsafe living conditions. In some states, that's criminal. I know, she whispered. Just didn't know how to fight back. Jack's green eyes hardened. I do, and we're going to make sure they never do this to anyone again. The next morning, he started his plan. First stop, Donna Briggs, the Carsons' neighbor across the street. She'd seen Emily faint in the yard 6 weeks earlier, but was turned away by Margaret. Wait. Donna agreed to give a sworn statement second. Stop. Trey Hudson, an HVAC contractor who'd inspected the shed months earlier. He confirmed in writing that it was unfit for human occupancy and that Margaret had ignored his recommendations. Finally, Jack met with Deputy Mark Corwin, an old Army buddy turned sheriff's deputy. Corwin explained that while criminal charges might be tricky, the Carsons' real weakness was their social standing. Reputation's everything to folks like them, he said. That's when Jack heard about the upcoming Maple Ridge Heritage Committee meeting where the Carsons were applying for a $50,000 grant to turn part of their property into a luxury guest house. Application required proof of exemplary residential standards and glowing character references. Jack smiled a cold, focused smile. Perfect. Over the next week, he gathered every shred of evidence. Emily's detailed statement, witness affidavits, photographs, medical records. Quietly, he let word spread through town about the Carsons' behavior, ensuring the right. People would be at that meeting. The Carsons had locked his daughter in a sweltering shed for months, thinking no one would ever find out. In 2 weeks, the whole town would know. The night before the Maple Ridge Heritage Committee meeting, Jack sat with Emily on his back porch. The summer heat had finally dipped below 90, and a light breeze rustled the leaves in his small vegetable garden. Emily looked healthier Then when he'd first brought her home, her color had returned, and the shadows under her eyes had faded, but there was still hesitation in her voice. "Dad, once you do this, there's no going back," she said quietly. Ryan might never forgive me for wrecking his parents' reputation. Jack leaned back in his chair, sipping iced tea. "If Ryan can't see the truth after what they put you through, then he's not the man you thought you married. Think he'll understand. And even if he doesn't, this isn't just about you. It's about making sure they can't hurt anyone else." The next evening, the town hall parking lot was jammed. Heritage Committee meetings usually drew a handful of retirees and local history buffs, but word had gotten around. Nearly 60 people packed the room, all eager to see what would happen. Jack had reserved a slot for public comment, sat in the front row with a manila folder on his lap. Side were photographs of the shed, witness statements from Donna and Trey, Emily's medical records, and her written testimony. Item 7 on the agenda was the Carson family's grant application. Margaret Carson stepped to the podium looking every bit the society matron navy dress, pearls, silver hair, perfectly styled. With polished confidence, she spoke of 4 generations of community leadership and described plans to restore their carriage house into luxury guest accommodations. The committee members nodded along, clearly impressed. When public comment opened, Jack walked to the podium. The room fell silent. "My name is Jack Reynolds," he began, his voice steady. "I'm here to speak about the Carsons' claim of exemplary residential standards." He opened the folder and held up the first photo. The shed's interior, the narrow cot, the plastic bin of clothes, the thermometer reading 104 degrees Fahrenheit. Gasps rippled through the crowd. "This," Jack continued, "is where they made my daughter live for 3 months while her husband was overseas. No air conditioning. Limited access to food and water. Locked out of the main house at night. All because she wasn't blood family." He read excerpts from Donna Briggs's affidavit about seeing Emily collapse in the yard, from Trey Hudson's report declaring the shed unfit for occupancy. Then he presented Emily's records heat, exhaustion, dehydration, stress-related symptoms. Margaret stood abruptly. "This is one-sided. Emily was free to make other arrangements." "With what money?" Jack shot back. "After you took most of her paycheck for expenses? After you intercepted her calls and emails?" From the audience, Deputy Mark Corwin rose. "I've reviewed the evidence. Under California law, forced isolation, economic control, and unsafe living conditions form a clear pattern of abuse." Committee Member Sarah Phillips spoke next. "I move that we table the Carson application pending investigation." All 7 hands went up. The grant was dead, and the matter was referred to county authorities. Margaret's voice shook with rage. "This isn't over." Jack met her gaze. "Ma'am, it's just getting started." That night, as he drove Emily home, Jack knew the Carsons' armor had been pierced. The reputation they valued above all else was crumbling in. He was far from finished. A week after the Heritage Committee meeting, Ryan Carson stepped off a long flight from Southeast Asia, expecting to see his parents waiting at the gate. Instead, it was Jack. "Where's Emily? Where are my folks?" Ryan asked, confused. "Your wife is safe at my house," Jack said evenly. "Your parents are dealing with some legal issues. We need to talk." They drove to a small coffee shop near the airport. Jack spread out the same evidence he'd presented at the committee meeting: photos of the shed, witness statements, Emily's medical records. As Ryan read, the color drained from his face. "This can't be right," he muttered. "Mom wouldn't," but the conviction in his voice was gone. "There's an explanation," Jack said flatly. "Your parents used your absence to isolate, control, and humiliate my daughter. They counted on her love for you to keep her quiet." Ryan stared at the picture of the thermometer minus 104 degrees Fahrenheit. "She was living in there all this time," called her every week. "And your mother listened to every word," Jack said. "Emily was afraid telling you the truth would hurt your career." By the time they reached Jack's home in Fairview, Ryan was silent. Emily was waiting on the porch. Jack stepped back and watched 2 years of marriage play out in 30 seconds of the shock. The tears, the tentative embrace that quickly turned desperate. An hour later, the three of them sat in Jack's living room. Ryan's voice was steady. "Now, I've called a lawyer. I'm filing for legal separation from my parents' finances, business, and influence. I'm also giving a sworn statement to Deputy Corwin for any charges they want to pursue." Emily shook her head. "Ryan, you don't have to choose." "Yes, I do," he cut in. "They hurt you. They could have killed you. I don't want their money, their business, or anything tied to them. I want a clean break." He looked at Jack. "If you'll have me, I'd like to work for your construction company." "I need to start over, and so do we." Jack studied him. "Can you swing a hammer? Show up every day, even when you're sore and tired?" "Yes, sir," Ryan said without hesitation. "Then we'll see what you're made of," Jack replied. The weeks that followed moved quickly. Ryan signed away all claims to the Carson estate and trust fund. In return, he demanded a written acknowledgement from his parents admitting their treatment of Emily and issuing a formal apology. When they refused, he made the divorce from their finances public complete, with allegations of abuse. The fallout was swift. Charles lost major investment clients. Margaret was quietly removed from charity boards, the country club, conversations. Stopped when she walked in. The Carsons' empire of influence was collapsing. One evening, Jack found Ryan in the garage, learning how to frame a wall alongside the crew. His hands were blistered, but there was a grin on his face. Emily, now working as a bookkeeper for a local nonprofit, came home tired, but happy helping families navigate social services, making sure no one went through what she had endured. The Carsons had tried to break her. Instead, they'd given her a new purpose. Jack wasn't done making sure they paid for it. 6 months later, the Carson name was a shadow of what it had been. In the Maple Ridge Gazette, a small piece in the community section caught Jack's eye. Local charity gala falls short of expectations. The article described Margaret Carson's attempt to host a fundraising dinner for the Historical Society. She'd planned for 60 guests, but only 18 showed up. The proceeds barely covered the catering bill. The paper was polite, but Jack could read between the lines most of the town had decided the Carsons were too toxic to associate with. Meanwhile, life for Emily and Ryan had changed completely. They'd moved into a modest 2-bedroom apartment across town, paying rent with their own money. Ryan was working full-time for Jack's construction company, learning the trade from the ground up. At first he'd been slow, awkward with tools, and sore after every shift. But he never complained. And the older crew members started warming to him. Emily had taken a job as a bookkeeper for a small nonprofit that helped families navigate social services. The pay wasn't huge, but she came home every day with stories about the people she'd helped: single parents finding housing, elderly neighbors getting much-needed medical support. Jack could see the pride in her eyes. One Saturday afternoon, Jack invited them over for dinner. After they ate, Emily shared something new. "The legal aid office called," she said. "They want me to speak at a conference about financial abuse in domestic relationships, share my story with social workers and law enforcement." "You going to do it?" Jack asked. "I think so," she said, glancing at Ryan. "If it helps even one person recognize the signs or find the courage to get out, it'll be worth it." Jack felt a surge of pride. She'd been broken once, but she hadn't stayed broken. Later that night, after they left, Jack walked out to the back of his property. There stood the small guest house he'd built over the past few months, properly insulated, with heating, air conditioning, running water, and a stocked kitchenette. Above the door, a sign read, "Monroe House, Safe Harbor." 3 women had already stayed there since it opened, each finding a safe place to regroup before starting over. It wasn't something Jack advertised. Word traveled quietly through the local networks that helped people in bad situations. If someone showed up at his door needing a place, they'd get it, no questions, no rent, just time and safety. Deputy Corwin had filed formal charges against the Carsons 3 months earlier: reckless endangerment, abuse of a vulnerable adult, and conspiracy to commit emotional abuse. The case was winding its way through the courts, but Corwin was confident. "A jury's going to see those pictures of the shed and hear Emily's testimony," he told Jack. Even if they dodge jail, they'll have a criminal record, and that matters to people like them. As Jack turned off the lights in the guest house and headed back to his porch, his phone buzzed. A text from Emily. "Thanks for dinner, Dad. Thanks for everything. Love you." Jack smiled, typing back, "Love you. Too, sweetheart. Sleep well." He sat down in the quiet night, content. The war had been fought, the right side had won, and his daughter was safe. For Jack Reynolds, that was all that mattered. The summer evening in Fairview was warm but pleasant. The kind of night where you could sit outside with a glass of iced tea and watch the fireflies come out. Jack Reynolds had gotten used to these quiet moments, but he never took them for granted, especially now that Emily was safe, thriving, and smiling again. Every Thursday had become family night at his place. Emily and Ryan would come over for a simple dinner: meatloaf, roast chicken, or something off Jack's grillin'. They'd talk about work, life, and plans for the future. That evening, Ryan was in good spirits. "Frank let me handle the electrical. Roughin' on the Morrison house this week," he said, flexing his now calloused hands. "Didn't embarrass myself too badly?" Jack chuckled. That's the difference between working with your hands and pushing paper around. One of them builds something real. Emily reached across the table, taking both men's hands. "I got a call from the legal aid office today. They want me to speak at a conference on financial abuse and domestic relationships, share my story with social workers and law enforcement." Jack studied her face. "You going to do it?" "I think so," she said. "If it helps even one person spot the signs earlier, or find the courage to get out, it'll be worth it." Ryan squeezed her hand. "It'll help more than one." After they left, Jack wandered out back to the small guest house he'd built Monroe House Safe Harbor. It stood about the size of the Carson shed, but the comparison ended there. This place had proper insulation, climate control, plumbing, and a stocked kitchenette. Soft lighting made it glow warmly against the night. Word of the guest house had spread quietly through local support networks. In just a few months, 3 women had stayed there, each escaping a bad situation. Jack never asked for details. No. He offered with safety, privacy, and time to plan their next move. The legal case against the Carsons was moving forward. Deputy Mark Corwin kept Jack updated whenever he could. The charges: reckless endangerment, abuse of a vulnerable adult, conspiracy to commit emotional abuse, were serious, and the evidence was damning. Even if they avoid prison, Corwin had said, a criminal record will stick. That matters in their world. Jack knew it was true. The Carson social standing was already crumbling. Invitations had dried up. Business partners had backed away. Margaret's once prized charity connections were gone. They were learning slowly, painfully, that some wounds don't heal with money or influence. Jack stood in the doorway of the guest house, letting the cool air from the AC brush against his skin. He thought about the shed behind the Carson estate, the unbearable heat, the isolation. Emily had walked out of that place with nothing but a duffel bag and her father's hand in hers. Now, she had her dignity back, her marriage rebuilt on honesty, and a new mission to help others. He locked up the guest house, walked back to his porch, and sat down. His phone buzzed with a message from Emily. "Thanks for dinner, Dad." "Love you," Jack smiled as he typed back. "Love you too, sweetheart. Sleep well." Justice had been served. His family was safe. And as far as Jack Reynolds was concerned, that was the best victory any man could hope for. Not long after that warm summer night, Jack Reynolds noticed something shifting in Emily. She wasn't just recovering, she was stepping into a new role. The legal aid conference she'd been invited to speak at was fast approaching, and she was spending her evenings at the kitchen table with a notepad, carefully outlining what she wanted to say. "One Thursday dinner," she admitted, "Dad, I'm nervous. It's one thing to tell you what happened. It's another to stand in front of strangers, professionals, and lay it all out." Jack leaned back in his chair, his voice steady. "Emily, you lived through it. You have the truth on your side. And there's someone out there who needs to hear exactly what you have to say." Ryan, sitting beside her, nodded. "You've already helped me see things I didn't see before. You'll help others too." A week later, Jack drove them to the conference, held at a civic center to counties over. The room was filled with social workers, law enforcement officers, and volunteers from shelters across the state. When Emily's turn came, she walked to the podium with her head high. She didn't rush. She spoke about the small, cutting remarks that started before her wedding, about the financial control disguised as teaching responsibility, about the day she was told she could no longer sleep in her own bedroom because her husband was away. She described the Shadid's heat, its isolation, the way it slowly stripped away her confidence. And then she spoke about the moment her father knocked on the door and she realized she didn't have to stay. The room was silent when she finished. Then one by one, people stood to clap. Several approached her afterward, sharing their own stories or asking how they could better spot the warning signs in others. On the drive home, Emily was quiet. But it wasn't the quiet of fear. It was the quiet of someone processing the weight of what they'd just done. "I think," she said finally, "that was the first time I told it without feeling shame." "That's because it's not your shame to carry," Jack replied. Meanwhile, the case against the Carsons was inching forward. Deputy Mark Corwin kept his promise to keep Jack updated. The prosecutor was confident between the photographs, medical records, and sworn statements. The pattern of abuse was clear. Even if the Carsons' lawyers tried to settle, the damage to their name was irreversible. Jack didn't gloat. He didn't need to. The Carsons were already living in a kind of exile, Abers avoiding them, business partners cutting ties, charity boards politely declining their involvement. That weekend, Jack stopped by the Monroe House safe harbor to make sure it was ready. Word had come through the grapevine that another woman might need a place to stay. He restocked the fridge, checked the linens, and made sure the little welcome note handwritten by Emily was on the nightstand. As evening fell, Jack sat on his porch with a glass of iced tea, watching the sun dip behind the trees. His phone buzzed. Text from Emily. "Thanks for today, Dad. Speaking up felt good." Jack smiled as he typed back. "Proud of you, sweetheart. Keep going." She was no longer just his daughter who had survived. She was becoming a voice for others still trapped, and that, Jack thought, might be the best justice of all. Early one Saturday morning, Jack Reynolds stood in his garage wiping his hands on an old shop rag. The project he'd been working on for weeks was finally complete. What had started as a rough idea the night he'd brought Emily home from the Carson estate was now a fully functional guest house, small but solid. With proper insulation, heating and cooling, running water, and a stocked kitchenette. Above the door, a wooden sign read, "Monroe House, Safe Harbor." It was the same size as the Carson shed, but the resemblance ended there. This place was warm in the winter, cool in the summer, and most importantly safe. Over the past few months, 3 women had stayed there, each escaping situations they weren't ready to talk about. Jack never pried. He just handed them the keys, made sure the fridge was full, and let them breathe. That morning, Emily stopped by after her shift at the nonprofit. She walked through the little guest house, smiling at the neatly made bed, the small vase of fresh flowers on the table. "Dad, it's perfect," she said softly. "It's everything I wish I'd had back then." "That's the idea," Jack replied. "If someone's stuck, they'll have a place to land. No one sleeps in a sweatbox on my watch." The legal case against the Carsons was moving forward. Deputy Mark Corwin had filed charges months earlier: reckless endangerment, abuse of a vulnerable adult, conspiracy to commit emotional abuse, and now the wheels of the court system were grinding on. "The prosecutor's solid," Mark told Jack over coffee one afternoon. "Even if they plead out, they'll have a record, and that matters in their world." Jack didn't need the gavel to fall to feel satisfied. The Carsons were already paying in ways money couldn't fix. Charles had lost high-profile investment clients. Margaret's charity invitations had dried up. At country club luncheons, people who once clamored to sit at her table now avoided eye contact. That evening, Emily and Ryan came over for their usual Thursday dinner. Ryan talked about learning drywall work with the crew, joking about how he Still couldn't cut a straight line without someone watching over his shoulder. Emily shared updates from the nonprofit, how she'd helped an elderly couple navigate medical assistance paperwork. After dessert, she mentioned the upcoming legal aid conference again. They've asked me to focus on the financial control. Part of my story? I think that's the piece people miss the most. It doesn't always start with yelling or bruises. Sometimes it's numbers on a spreadsheet and rules that sound reasonable. Jack nodded slowly. That's exactly why you need to tell it, so people recognize it before it gets worse. Later, when they'd left, Jack walked back out to the guest house, turned on the lights, stood in the doorway, and let the cool air from the AC brush over him. This space was more than just a building, it was a promise. He locked the door and headed back to his porch. His phone buzzed with a text from Emily. "Thanks for dinner, Dad. Love you." Jack smiled as he typed back, "Love you too, sweetheart. Sleep well." In his mind, the war was over, but the mission wasn't. There would always be someone who needed a safe harbor, and as long as Jack Reynolds was around, they'd have one by late autumn. The air in Fairview had cooled. The evenings carrying that crisp bite that signaled winter was on its way. Jack Reynolds sat at his kitchen table with a mug of black coffee, scanning the latest update from Deputy Mark Corwin. The case against the Carsons was moving, albeit slowly, through the county court system. Prosecutor had made it clear between the photos, sworn affidavits, and Emily's medical records. The evidence was more than enough to secure convictions. On reckless endangerment, abuse of a vulnerable adult, and conspiracy to commit emotional abuse. Mark's note ended with a simple line. Even if they cut a deal, the record sticks. That's a life sentence in their circles. Jack folded the paper and leaned back. The Carsons' life in Maple Ridge had already unraveled. Charles's investment firm had lost major clients, and Margaret's name had quietly vanished from charity rosters. Once prized invitations to luncheons, galas, and country club events had dried up completely. In a community where reputation was currency, they were broke. That Thursday evening, Emily and Ryan arrived for dinner. Ryan came in from the porch carrying a bundle of firewood. "Frank had me running electrical on the Stevens remodel all week," he said, setting the logs by the fireplace. "Think I'm finally getting the hang of it?" Emily smiled at him, then turned to Jack. "I've been asked to give my talk from the legal aid conference at 2 more events, one for the Sheriff's Department training and another for a statewide domestic abuse task force." Jack felt that familiar swell of pride. They couldn't have picked a better voice. Over dinner, they talked about plans for the holidays. How Emily wanted to host a small gathering at their apartment for friends from her nonprofit. Jack listened, content, watching his daughter laugh again freely. Without the guarded edge she'd carried for months after leaving the Carson estate. After dessert, Emily stepped out to the guest house, Monroe House, Safe Harbor, to help Jack prepare it for a new arrival. A woman in her 40s was coming in that weekend after leaving a controlling partner. They checked the bedding, restocked the fridge, and placed a fresh vase of flowers on the small table. Emily added a handwritten card. "You're safe here. Take your time, E." As they walked back, Emily looked toward the glow of the guest house in the dark yard. "I used to think the worst thing about what happened to me was how small it made me feel. Now I think the best thing to come from it is knowing I can help someone else feel big again." Jack slipped an arm around her shoulders. "That's the kind of strength they'll never understand." Later, after Ryan and Emily had gone home, Jack sat by the fire, his phone lighting up with a text from her. "Thanks for letting me help with the guest house tonight." "Love you, Dad," he replied. "Love you too, sweetheart. Proud of you." Outside, the Monroe house stood quietly under the November sky, ready for whoever needed it next. The war with the Carsons was nearly over, but the mission protecting family and giving refuge to those with nowhere else to turn was something Jack knew he'd carry for the rest of his life. Winter settled over Fairview with gray skies and the scent of wood smoke in the air. Jack Reynolds didn't mind the cold. It made the guest house Monroe House Safe Harbor feel even warmer, a beacon in the quiet backyard. That morning, he'd stepped inside to check on its latest guest, a young mother with 2 children who'd arrived the week before. They were gone for the day, but their coats hung neatly on hooks, and the smell of fresh coffee lingered. Jack smiled to himself. The place was doing exactly what he'd built it to do: give people breathing room when they needed it most. Life. For Emily and Ryan had settled into a steady rhythm. Ryan was putting in full weeks on Jack's construction crew, slowly trading the softness of an office man for the muscle and grit of a tradesman. He still made mistakes, but he showed up early, stayed late, and never asked for special treatment. Jack could respect that. Emily, meanwhile, had become something of a quiet force at her nonprofit. She was helping families navigate the maze of social services, often staying late to ensure paperwork was filed or a phone call got returned. She told Jack that every time she helped someone avoid being trapped in a bad situation, she felt like she was reclaiming another piece of herself. One cold Thursday night over dinner, Emily shared new developments. "Dad, the legal aid folks want me to speak at their spring fundraiser? They're pairing me with a retired judge to talk about how financial abuse gets overlooked in domestic cases." Jack's eyes softened. "Keep saying yes to these invitations, Emily, every time you speak. You're helping someone else see a way out." Ryan nodded. "Not just helping strangers, she's helping me understand what my parents did. I can't change where I came from, but I can choose who I become." Jack didn't say it, but hearing Ryan speak that way made him think. The young man was finally shedding the last of his parents' shadow. The case against the Carsons was still moving through the courts. Deputy Mark Corwin had warned it might take another 6 months before it was resolved, but he was confident the outcome would be decisive. "Even if they manage a plea deal," Mark told Jack over coffee one afternoon, "the record will be public. They'll never scrub it clean." In the meantime, word of their downfall had spread far beyond Maple Ridge. Charles had lost 2 more key clients. Margaret's last public appearance at a charity event had been met with thin smiles and polite but swift goodbyes. The social exile was complete. After dinner that night, Emily followed Jack out to the guest house to drop off a box of groceries for the young mother staying there. Melly placed a jar of her homemade soup in the fridge and straightened the stack of blankets on the shelf. She left another note on the nightstand. "You matter. Don't forget that." When they walked back toward the main house, Emily looked at the warm light spilling from the guest house windows. "You know, Dad," she said quietly, "what happened to me doesn't feel like the ending anymore. It feels like the beginning of something I'm supposed to do." Jack put his arm around her shoulders. "That's how you win, sweetheart. You take what tried to break you, and you use it to build something better." That night, after she and Ryan left, Jack sat on the porch, his coffee steaming in the cold air. His phone buzzed. A message from Emily. "Love you, Dad. Thanks for dinner." He typed back, "Love you too. I'm proud of you every day." The Carsons had lost their power.
Ow.
But Jack and Emily had gained something far more valuable: purpose, resilience, and a quiet determination to protect others from the same kind of harm. And in Jack's book, that was the only victory that mattered. Snow still clung to the edges of the sidewalks in Fairview, melting in slow, thin streams that wound toward the gutters. Jack Reynolds sat at his workbench in the garage, sanding down the frame for a custom-built bunk bed. The guest house had a new family coming in, a grandmother, raising 2 young grandsons after leaving a toxic living situation, and Jack wanted them to feel welcome from the first night. Emily arrived mid-morning, bundled in a thick coat, cheeks pink from the cold. "Dad, I just got a call from the statewide domestic abuse task force," she said, setting down a thermos of hot cocoa for him. "They want me to help draft guidelines for identifying financial control in early relationship stages. Not just for victims, but for teachers, counselors, even bank employees." Jack looked up from his work, pride softening his weathered face. "That's big, Emily. You're going to help people spot trouble before it even starts." Ryan showed up a little later, carrying a box of hardware for the bed. "Frank says, I'm almost ready to run a crew on my own. Guess I'm finally learning to measure twice and cut once," he said with a grin. Together, the 3 of them worked until the bed was sturdy, sanded smooth, and ready for the guest house. They carried it across the yard, set it up with fresh linens, and stocked the small shelves with children's books Emily had picked up from a thrift store as they stood in the doorway. The little space warm and inviting, Emily's voice grew quiet. I wish places like this existed everywhere. People need more than just a roof. They need dignity, hope, a starting point. Jack put a hand on her shoulder. That's what we're building here, one family at a time. The case against the Carsons was nearly at its conclusion. Deputy Mark Corwin had hinted that a plea agreement was likely within weeks. Whatever the outcome, the damage to their name was beyond repair. Jack didn't care about headlines or gossip. He cared that Emily was free, stronger than ever, and using her voice to protect others. That evening, back inside the main house, Emily curled up on the couch with a cup of tea while Ryan stoked the fire. Jack watched them, feeling the rare satisfaction of a battle hard fought, and truly won. But deep down, he knew their work wasn't finished. There would always be someone else who needed a safe harbor, and that's where you, the listener, come in. If Emily's journey and Jack's determination have moved you, share this story with someone who might need to hear it. Leave your thoughts in the comments. Your experiences, your advice, your encouragement could make all the difference for someone else. And if you want more stories like this, stories about resilience, justice, and hope, make sure you subscribe to the channel so you don't miss the next chapter. Together we can keep building safe harbors one life at a time.